So I am Ann Clothier. I am here today from Brookside Museum, which is the home of the Saratoga County Historical Society. And we have recently undergone a name change, in fact, to the Saratoga County History Center. And so I have been there for 10 years now, and I am the Director of Education. And I do a lot of different programs, events, things like that, help out as with all sorts of different stuff. And but one of my personal interests happens to be early photography, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. So I do have some slides that I'll be sharing and through the screen sharing process, but also at the end, I've got a lot of stuff that I will be sharing as well. And you can see I've got everything laid out up here on the table. And this is just, to be honest, a fraction of my personal collection. I've been collecting photography for many, many years. It actually grew out of, was brought up by antique collectors, and photography is just a little bit easier to store than vintage clothing, vintage textiles, furniture, things like that. But you can still study a lot of those things through looking at the photographs. They're just more 2D for the most part. So that's part of what actually got me into it. And but I definitely came into this through studying early fashion and different types of clothing and fabrics and things like that. So, all right, I'm going to share that screen again. There we go. And so again, this presentation is called Looking History in the Eye, a brief overview of 19th century photography. And so what we're doing today is talking about these different ways of capturing photographs. And so I know we have some participants online. We also have some participants here at the museum. And so to make sure that you can see some of what I'm talking about, I'll also hold up a few things, but then we'll loop around at the end and we can also show the online people some of what we're talking about so we can see the same things, just perhaps in a slightly different order. And a lot of what you're also hearing is also on the handout as well. So talking about early photography, the phrase itself, photography, reference to essentially drawing with light. And especially as they were experimenting with the very earliest elements of what became photography, that's really a lot of what was going on. Experimentation with camera obscura and using light and chemicals to capture. And that's, we hear that phrase a lot, to capture certain visuals, capture images, capture landscapes, things like that. And often we have to ask, there was so much effort being put into this. Why did people want photography? Why was this such something that everyone was scrambling to try and do? And there was elements of, but people wanted to try and capture these images. And so there have been various forms of artwork over the years that people have tried to, again, capture what they saw for future, to try and figure out a way to, there's a phrase, secure the shadow ere the light fades type of thing, is a quote we hear a lot with early photography. But people had been working on, obviously, paintings since for thousands upon thousands of years. So paintings are an early way of trying to capture via a likeness or a scene that people could see or things like that. And certainly drawings as well. And I have some examples here of, oddly enough, a combination of some of these that we talk about being we're skipping ahead a little bit, but a daguerreotype of a painting of a person here, just for some of the people who happen to be in the audience. And I'll share that at the end on screen as well. So again, before photography, we've got these drawings. We've got these paintings. And we even have silhouettes and the process of cutting paper to capture the profile of someone. And this was a very popular art form in the later 18th and early 19th centuries, and was practiced by a number of people. It certainly takes a very artistic and talented eye to really get the exact profile of a person's face. And there were certain other things that were captured in silhouette as well. They're a bit more rare, but you do find other scenes and such through cut paper. Now in 1826, Joseph Nicephore Niepce was experimenting in France with, again, using light, using chemicals to capture scenes. And his early scenes are kind of foggy, as though you're seeing them through the mist, but it is a street scene of buildings, and you can see that there are shapes there. But it took hours to capture these type of images. And so, but it was really the first time that these things were being captured. And so he had also been in partnership with another individual, Louis-Jacques Monde Daguerre. And but Niepce passed away before they really could make a lot of progress and have a more reliable, more usable, shorter time span way of capturing these scenes. And so in 1839, Daguerre introduced one of his processes, and he actually ended up working with the French government to secure a very generous sort of annual income for himself and also Niepce's son because of their work together and their invention. And so this concept was purchased by the French government to release as a gift to the world. And so in January of 1839, the Daguerreotype is introduced. And so these early Daguerreotypes have incredible clarity. Now they still are taking a decent amount of time for this image to be affixed. And a Daguerreotype is on metal and also uses mercury fumes, which means that daguerreotypes certainly could be dangerous to produce. And as I said, lots of experimentation through this process. But daguerreotypes were the first method of photography that really lasted for a while and also led to further innovation as well. And the thing is, the more people you have working on something at a given time, the more likely further innovation is likely to occur. So you've got a whole bunch of the best and brightest really excited to be trying out this new method. So they're figuring out, all right, if I adjust these chemicals this way, if I use a different metal, if I alter the amount of light that's being used, and they're figuring out stuff very, very rapidly. And so again, these images, they start off with these sort of street scenes, and you can see buildings and such in the background and everything, because the buildings aren't going to move. Certainly the sun, the source of light, does somewhat, but these are the first things being captured, are these scenes of Paris and things like that. Now, one of these scenes does include the first captured human. The only reason he isn't a complete blur like everyone else was because he was getting his shoes shined. So he was standing still for a little while. So he manages to appear in the scene. Again, Daguerre himself, he also was an inventor in a lot of other ways, and he had been known in Paris for a while, but again, he truly became immortalized when his name became synonymous with this early photography, the Daguerreotype. And we're going to be talking today about, again, photography that was common in the mid to later 19th century, again, starting with that 1839 innovation of the daguerreotype. And as a quick overview, the process roughly goes daguerreotype, ambrotype, tintype or ferrotype, carte de visite, and cabinet card. However, there are certain elements of this that they cross paths periodically, and there's other less common formats that also are at play here. But I'm going to start by talking most about daguerreotypes. Now, the thing about daguerreotypes, they are usually fairly easy to identify, again, primarily because, for one, they are cased images, and they have a very strong mirror-like appearance. And it almost looks more like a pocket mirror when you first look at one, because if you look at it at just the wrong angle, you're getting a mirrored image. But if you get it at exactly the right angle, it's like the face appears out of the mist. And so that's a really fascinating thing about these daguerreotypes. The other thing is their incredible clarity. Now, the ones that our online viewers are seeing on the screen, to be honest, it's still not advancing. Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. Okay, let's see if we can. Okay. Let's see if we can go from current slide. Does that come up now? Okay, so, all right, so the daguerreotype, the ones that are seen on the screen, to be honest, the issues with any clarity on those or any lines you're seeing are actually the result of the scanning process. To see these in person, again, the clarity is incredible. And even with multi-megapixels today, sometimes that clarity is still almost unmatched. And you can, in, again, some of these street scenes of daguerreotypes and things like that, you can count the number of panels in a window. You can see what type of lace is used for the curtains with the right type of magnification. It's there. So daguerreotypes are really incredible in their clarity. Now, daguerreotypes can also be fragile in a number of ways. And certainly moisture can have an element to do with that, and the idea of tarnishing. But the biggest thing about daguerreotypes is never, ever, ever touch the unprotected image itself, because even the slightest touch of the most gentle paintbrush, even if you're just trying to get a little bit of dust off of that, it will remove the image itself. And so you hear about swipes on daguerreotypes. And especially if you're touching the face of a daguerreotype that has, again, no glass over it, you touch that, you leave your fingerprint behind and you take away the image, and it's gone. And there's daguerreotypes that are in museum collections that have been handled improperly, that the best and brightest conservators in the world still can't get that image back. It is gone. Okay, let's see. Anything coming up yet? Nope, okay. So what I can do is switch over and do this as more, and leave behind the screen sharing and just do this as a live, because I've got most of the stuff up here that I can share and talk about on screen as well. So I will work on ending that screen share here. All right. All right, so am I visible on the screen now by chance? Okay, excellent. So again, in talking about these daguerreotypes, these very mirror image sorts of things, and as you can see, as I do this, it catches the light and turns into a mirror. And at other times, and again, I'll try and get closer at the end here to show, but these, again, the face appears out of the mist. Now, sometimes you will find uncased daguerreotypes, and this is one that I have encased in plastic now to keep it as protected as I can. Most of the time, though, you will find daguerreotypes as cased images. And that's what we see right here in these types. And on this part of the table, I have these cased images. And we can see that they're like a little book that opens and closes. And so we can see that it actually protects it fairly well. And these have sort of a structure to them as well. And there is certainly glass over the top of it to protect that daguerreotype image itself too. And one very clear one, and I'll have to ask you, is it visible on screen well right now? Okay, so this is a interesting daguerreotype that is actually of a fraternal member of an organization, either the Masons or the Oddfellows and things like that. And so this one is in very good condition and has been very well protected by its case over the years. And I'll turn this way a little bit to share that with our live audience here. And you can see that sort of almost shaving mirror element if you look at it without having the image appear first. And then again, the face appears out of the mist. So again, keeping daguerreotypes protected is very, very important, and keeping them in the case as much as possible is key. And they do have what's called seals, which is a type of, at first glance, almost looks more like a tape that connects the glass and makes almost a sandwich to protect that image itself. And so you don't really want to mess with that unless you are very experienced and have a lot of information about how to handle these without injuring that image itself. Now, moving on to one of the next innovations, we then get to the concept of ambrotypes. Now, ambrotypes, sadly, are easiest to identify when they are having condition issues, because ambrotypes are on glass. And so once that image starts to fall away, then we can see that it is on glass. Is this somewhat visible here? Okay. And so we can see that some of that green backing is visible because that some of that image there has started to fall away. And this is what we call a half case. It's missing its cover, the cover of the book per se. Now, these cases typically do have a hook along the side that helps to secure it. And again, typically there's a binding that holds that together. I'm just going to step over here for a moment. And we can see again how with this ambrotype, it started to sort of fall away. And now also, as time went on, we often hear about the price of photography. And you hear about, oh, well, if someone had their photograph taken back then, they must have had lots and lots of money, because sometimes people only had their photograph taken once in their lifetime. For the very earliest days of photography, the daguerreotype era, yes, that might be the case. However, as time went on, just as I said earlier, the more people you have experimenting in a medium, the more innovation you get. Well, the more people you have experimenting in a medium and working with photography, there's more and more competition, so prices come down rapidly. So it becomes much more accessible to more and more people. And also, once ambrotypes are introduced, the materials fees come down drastically. It's on glass. So you don't even have to get these plates, these metal plates and everything. So again, more experimentation means more people doing this and lower costs. And so again, when we're looking at cased images, we typically see three types. We see the daguerreotypes, we see the ambrotypes, and then we also see what is called most commonly a tintype. But the proper term actually is ferrotype, because they're not on tin, technically. They are on a very thin sheet of iron. And so you do see cased tintypes. And that does get confusing. And as I said earlier, that it's easier to tell an ambrotype if the ambrotype has started to break down, because you can see where the image has fallen away from the glass. And so again, sometimes if the ambrotype is in excellent condition, it's kind of hard when it's in a case to be able to tell tintype from ambrotype. And so we do have some examples of some tintypes up here that are in cases. And this is one that is a tintype that's in a case. And so this is one of a woman posing before a backdrop, and she's holding a book or a photo album here. And so sometimes you can also tell by looking at the surface of the image. The tintypes sometimes have a little bit more of a texture to them than the ambrotype. Again, ambrotype being on glass, very smooth in raking light. Tintypes sometimes have a little bit more texture to them. I'm just going to step over here a little bit. And so, and it also is possible to very gently, carefully, and I often put a little piece of cloth in between to use a magnet to see if you can get the ferrotype to attract a magnet as well. So again, protect the image though. So let's see. So, and also just to go over some of the dates for these things, I mentioned daguerreotypes, 1839, they start to fade out by the 1850s once those ambrotypes are introduced around 1855. And so, but the daguerreotypes linger on until about 1860, and there's still some very specialized photographers who continue using the method for even longer after that. And so again, ambrotype about 1855 to 1865-ish. And then the ferrotype or tintype, then we get that around 1858. And that one continues on for actually quite a long time. That one remains common through the 1880s, but then you still see tintypes common, after even after 1900 into the 1920s. I've even seen ones of World War I, World War II soldiers on boardwalks. It became more of a carnival sort of novelty. So it is possible to see tintypes on up through into the 20th century. And so after this point, then we move on to works on paper. Now, this has some implications, some good, some bad. And for one, it drastically brings down the price even more. And tintypes were fairly accessible to a lot of different people. And you see tintypes and ferrotypes of farmers, laborers, blacksmiths, all sorts of people who actually are showing up in their occupational clothing to have their photograph taken. And you're seeing this even more with works on paper. And the other great thing with once we get works on paper, people are more likely to label them. And that's the thing with cased photography. They are not labeled very often. And also even tintypes that are not cased, it's very difficult to write on the back of a tintype. And you do get paper sort of mats for tintypes as well. And sometimes people wrote on those, but these mats also fall away easily, they disintegrate, and so often that context is lost. But once we get into these carte de visites, and that's these little cards here, that's when we start to sometimes see names on the back. Not as often as we'd like, but we do get photographers' back marks. So the great thing with that is that we at least get a geographic area to narrow down. Are we talking about Little Falls, New York? Are we talking about London, England? So it does give us a little bit more context when we're working with trying to identify a sitter, or at least figure out where this came from. It also can help us narrow down the era, because using early directories and such, we can figure out when that photographer was practicing at that particular address. If they had moved on to another town, it gives us a lot more parameters to, again, figure out dates, possible subjects, and things like that. So, so these cartes de visite, to use the proper French, so these cartes, these cards for visits, essentially. So these are visiting cards that could be distributed to friends. And the best, modern relevance I've found to this is when a senior is graduating from high school and you get your senior pictures. And you get a whole bunch of these and you exchange them around with your friends in school. And you send some to grandma and you send some to aunt so-and-so, and you might sign the back. That's very similar to the way these cartes de visite were dispersed. And a lot of these were often printed at one time. And you do sometimes find stacks of these that are identical or not nearly identical from the same sitting. So that these were being bought in bulk and bought with an intent to distribute to friends or to send to cousin so-and-so who had moved to Iowa or whatever. And you also do see, especially through these great back marks, quite a bit of geographic dispersal as well. And even in family albums right here in upstate New York, you might find, again, a lot of references. Okay, so it was taken by Baker and Record photographers in Saratoga. Oh, another one by Baker and Record. Oh, there's one from Schuylerville, one from Ballston Spa. Then you find one that is from Chicago, and it's most likely from being mailed by some distant relative or friend and sharing a photograph. So it's interesting to see how these things track. And again, those back marks that identify these photographers are a great way of sort of trying to figure all of that out. Now, let's see. Now, after we are no longer with the cartes de visite, then we move on a little bit more into cabinet cards. And I don't have as many of those with me at the moment today. This is a slightly smaller version here. But cabinet cards, these are introduced around 1865 or so and continue on up through about the turn of the century. And they come in a variety of different sort of sizes and formats, but they have a sort of even stiffer than the cartes de visite, because this, again, is kind of it's not quite cardboard, but heavier sort of card stock kind of thing. The cabinet cards are even stiffer, and they sort of build in their own matting to surround this image. And the cartes de visite and the cabinet cards, again, being on paper, often have a photographer's back mark. These, again, could be easily handed around. Another note about cartes de visite, you see these a lot during the Civil War. So this is something that also a soldier might have his photograph taken and sent home of him in uniform, and his family might also have their photographs taken and the image sent to the soldier. But you do also still see a lot of Civil War era Ambrotypes and Tintypes and things like that. So that Civil War era, you see multiple forms of photography being shared, and finding cased images of soldiers or their family members and things like that. That might be something that was carried with the soldier to remind him of home, to remind him of his family. So, and that is, as a side note, a very desirable collecting focus among a lot of people is Civil War era photography, and especially soldiers in uniform. Great thing with that is there's people who can really look at those uniforms and see the details, see the types of buttons, the cut of the coat, if he's wearing a cap, and figure out at least what state they're from, and in some cases what regiment they're from. So there's a lot of detective work that goes on with a lot of these photographs as well. Now, another type of photography that is being utilized around this time also is what's referred to as the stereo view. And so this is a package deal. To truly enjoy a stereo view, you need to have a stereo viewer. And so this I just realized that one of my lenses is a little bit wonky right now. And so if it falls, it won't be a shock, but I'm going to sort of hold it in place at the moment. And so we take this stereo view, this double image, and we put it in these wire holders here. And the great thing about the stereo view is that this is kind of early 3D technology. And stereo views, again, are double images. And here we have one of a portrait of a woman. And we can see it's the exact same person on both sides. And it's taken with a camera with two lenses that are just a couple inches apart, and actually mimics the distance between the human eye pupils. And so there is very slight difference between these two images. And again, taken with the same camera, but again, lenses being just a little bit apart. And by then looking at this through a stereo viewer, it gives it that sort of three-dimensional appearance. And so this was incredibly popular, especially for landscapes. And probably the most popular outdoor scene that we see when it comes to stereo views is Niagara Falls. And there are tons of Niagara Falls stereo views out there. And part of that reason was because people were traveling there on vacation. And a lot of people were going there on their honeymoon. It is like the stereotypical honeymoon place, even in the 19th century, especially in the 19th century. And so to come back, it was kind of like what we in the mid 19th, in the in the say 1950s, 60s, 70s, it's like bringing all those slides back from your vacation to Hawaii and sharing them with your friends and neighbors type of thing. And so bringing back the stereo views was a way of sharing what you saw. And with Niagara Falls being sort of this wonder of the world, they wanted to be able to show off how big the falls were, what it looked like in different seasons. If you were there in the summer, you wanted stereo views of what it looked like in winter when with all the really wild ice formations and things like that. So that was a way of kind of touring the world and learning about other places. There were also a lot of stereo views of, again, Egypt, Japan, being able to actually go around and see all of these places that you might be able to ever see in person, but being able to experience them in your own living room. And I still hear from a lot of people that they remember seeing these sets in their grandmother's parlor, in their aunt's parlor, things like that. And this was kind of like the TV, the entertainment for that later 19th century, to be able to go through big box of stereo views using the stereo viewer. There were other occupations that used this as well. You also find medical stereo views that were used for medical education and also among doctors to try and identify certain diseases. I have set a very extensive set, multiple boxes of skin conditions of stereo views that are pretty disturbing. But it was a way of learning and sharing this. And some of them have been colored, and so in all their disturbing glory, but it was a way of going through and comparing and looking at your patient and saying, okay, is it a raised lesion? Is it this? Is it that? And they could use their stereo viewer to try and figure out, to diagnose what the issue was. So these were also very commonly used in schools as well for international education. Again, being able to see what the pyramids looked like, what it would look like to ride an elephant, or things like that, that kids sitting in their one-room schoolhouse in upstate New York might not otherwise be able to see. And so some of these also were used in a comedic way as well. You find a lot of stereo views that aren't necessarily local, aren't necessarily a tourist destination, but have some sort of comedic element. And this one is just entitled Tormentors. And it's a couple of people in a room who are frantically trying to use a sort of a duster with pesticide in it to get rid of the louses or bed bugs or whatever happens to be tormenting them. And they are panicking to try and get rid of this problem in the room. And so there's also a lot of these stereo views, comedic ones that have to do with sort of inside jokes about marriage, about families, about kids, and things like that too. Now, as I said, the most common view we see, at least locally, is Niagara Falls, but also we see lots of Saratoga Springs. And so that's another sort of local collecting focus. You have a lot of people who collect stereo views of Saratoga Springs, lots of exterior views of the mineral springs themselves, lots of views of the gigantic hotels, and also even interior views of those hotels and the humongous dining rooms that were built to accommodate all the guests that were coming to Saratoga Springs in the 19th century as well. So again, if you went to these resort towns like Saratoga Springs and such, you would want to bring home stereo views to be able to show your family what you saw, what you experienced, why you went, and all of that. All right. Now, I do have a few other things up here I wanted to mention. And we have here a larger sort of framed photograph that shows sort of a family scene here. And this one is a nice larger format. And this is, again, similar to that cabinet card era. And once the photographs start getting bigger, you also hear the phrase boudoir photo, which is not what we think of today when we hear that. But you see these larger formats, again, similar to these cabinet cards. So you see larger ones, you might even see them of farm scenes. And it's just, again, a way of capturing a larger photograph on paper. And so certainly there's areas of collecting focus, as I've mentioned a little bit, talking about photographs of Civil War soldiers, talking about photographs of certain geographic areas. There are people who collect things depending on both the medium of the photography. Some people like to focus entirely on daguerreotypes. Some people are really into stereo views. But again, those subjects. And sometimes those subjects can be fairly broad, or they can be pretty obscure too. And again, some people want to focus on a specific geographic area, but some want photographs that involve pets. There's quite the market for any photography that involves dogs or other types of pets. There's also people who focus on more of industrial photography, which certainly has relevance and connection to where we are right now in the Slate Valley. Photography was used to document what these industrial pursuits looked like, whether it was a factory, whether it was a quarry, things like that. So we do see photography, and often, again, that larger format photography used to capture that, because the people who owned these factories or quarries or whatever wanted to be able to show off what they had created. And sometimes it was for the purposes of gathering new investors, being able to show and say, well, this is what we've done in the past 10 years. Just think of what we could do with your investment, stuff like that. And so there's certainly elements of that. There's people who collect specifically occupational photos. I have one here of a tailor, and this is a tiny carte de visite, but he is holding, you'll have to help me with my angle here if it's visible or not. Okay, so he is holding gigantic scissors and some cloth. And so this is an occupational photograph of a tailor. And some people focus more on images of children. There's also another type of photography that does creep some people out a little bit. And I'll see if I can find my example of it here. Yes. This is one that, at first glance, it is a photograph of a young child. But if we look very closely, we can see that there's almost a human figure that's been blanketed in the background. And these are what are referred to as hidden mother photographs. And if you look really carefully, you can see the hands covered in that blanket peeking through underneath the baby's armpits. And this was a way of capturing a photograph of a very young child who was perhaps into that developmental phase of separation anxiety. And so if the mother wanted the focus of the photograph to be exclusively only on that child, then this was an option. The photographer would have a blanket or some sort of shawl to put over the mother or the photographer's assistant. And if the baby could sense that mama was there, the baby could feel that mama was there, and even smell that mama was there, they'd be more likely to be calm and stay relatively still. And so that is certainly a key part of getting a good, clear photograph. Even today, if someone's running, even with an iPhone trying to take a picture of someone, especially a little kid on the move, it comes out as a blur sometimes. Now, another sort of myth about photography was this idea that you had to stand still for an incredibly long period of time. Again, the earliest days of daguerreotypes, when they were still figuring out the process, figuring out light, figuring out chemicals, yes, it did take longer, especially right in that 1839 to 1840, 41, you are looking at some longer exposure times. But again, that rapidly came down as more people were experimenting. And so by the time of the tintype era, you're looking at exposure times of 5, 10, 15 seconds. So much of it has to do with light. The more light you have, the less time you need. And so even today, there is a tintype photographer who is working in Glens Falls. His name is Craig Murphy, and he has Glens Falls art. And I'm seeing if I have any of my examples of, yes, I do, of his work here today. And so I can honestly say that I am aware of what it feels like to have your portrait taken and in a photographer's studio in a tintype sort of format. And that was actually part of the publicity that went out for this event today was my tintype portrait. And so again, if anyone's interested, the company is called Glens Falls Art, and the photographer is Craig Murphy. And it was really a lot of fun. And he does a pop-up mobile tintype studio throughout the area sometimes. And so it is possible to get your tintype still done today. And another myth about photography that I want to mention is the idea of posing stands, because you will sometimes hear on eBay or online, sometimes in some fairly misleading articles, that, oh, if you see a posing stand in the picture, that means the person was dead. No. Postmortem photography certainly is a thing. We can talk about that more in a moment. But a posing stand is exclusively for the purpose of keeping you stone still while the photograph is being taken. And you don't need a posing stand to keep a dead person still. Besides physics, posing stand is not capable of holding up a deceased person. So a posing stand kind of looks like, it has like sort of tripod legs and a post. It comes almost up like a floor lamp, and then it attaches, sort of, you rest the back of your head against it, and it keeps you from sort of weaving around a little bit as you stand there waiting for the photograph to be taken. And so it kind of reminds you to stay very still. And so we actually used a posing stand when I had my portrait taken with Glens Falls Art. And it was very interesting. It didn't hurt. It's not like they're literally clamping your head into it, but it was definitely reminds you to stay still. So if you see a posing stand in a photograph, it does not mean at all that the person is dead. The person's very much alive. Again, on that topic, though, of postmortem photography, it did exist. And so there were multiple reasons for this. And part of it was to secure one last image of a person before they were gone forever. And there are still elements of this that exist today. There is an organization called, I believe, Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, that is a network of photographers that is available and that the hospitals are aware of for any parents who have had a child who is stillborn. And these photographers are able to come in and get photographs of the stillborn child for the parents if they decide at a later date that they want those images of that child that they never really got to truly meet. So postmortem photography does still exist. And there are still, and some people will take a photograph at the funeral parlor of an individual in their casket. It's kind of seen as taboo today, but in the 19th century, it was very much more common. And while I never want to say that people in the 19th century were more comfortable with death, they were certainly more familiar with it, and it visited more often in one way or another. And so people were not as cloistered away from it. It wasn't quite as taboo. It was again, a little bit more common. And so there are photographs that exist in all of these different mediums of people who have passed away. They're not extremely common. And as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of different areas of collecting focus. That's another area of collecting focus, postmortem photography. But usually with these photographs, you can tell that the person has passed away. You see a lot of these are images of women holding young children. Sometimes the kid is asleep, and that's sometimes the best time to take a picture of a kid. They're not moving, but there are other times where you see the sunken eyes and you can tell that the child has passed away. If you see an image of an adult, usually they are reclining, they might be in a bed, and again, you can tell that the person has passed away. But again, some people claim, oh, well, this person, their eyes look funny, they're dead in this picture. No, their eyes probably look funny because they have blue eyes, and blue does not show up particularly well in some of these early forms of photography. And I've seen elements of that on eBay. Oh, rare photograph of blind woman. And honestly, the photograph looks very much like the tintype I had taken of me a few years ago. I have blue eyes. I can see just fine. It's just that the blue doesn't capture quite as easily in some of these modes of photography. So when it comes to buying on eBay or anything like that, buyer beware. If it seems too good to be true, it may well. And there are also different types of fakes out there as well, especially of Civil War soldiers, because again, that's a major collecting focus. People have tried to copy these images in different ways, either using modern tintype photograph or various forms of trying to again, copy an existing photograph and then sell it to make some money. So again, be cautious. And the best way is to learn and to really become familiar with how these photographs look, how they feel. True 19th century tintypes are usually have what's called a japanned sort of backing. And it's usually this sort of dark brown kind of backing, dark brown to black. And it's kind of like a varnish. And again, not very exciting on this side, but this was usually what the back of a tintype looks like. And there's the front, also very thin metal. Whereas more modern ones, and again, the ones that I have of myself, they're not trying to pull one over on anyone, but it's thicker. It's actually a different type of metal, and the back is actually quite shiny. So this is an example of a modern tintype. So there's some ways to, again, keep an eye out for fakes because they do exist. Anything where you can potentially make money off of collectors, people have tried to fake it, be it paintings, furniture, all sorts of things over the years. So I see that someone in the audience has brought an image, and I'm really glad you did because I did not bring an example of one of those today, but I would love if you would be willing to come up and show it off if you'd like. We see these types of images a lot in parlors and such, and often. So, all right, if you want to stand here and you can let us know if it's coming through okay. Excellent. So this is what's referred to often as a solar enlargement. And so this is a type of photography that really took off in the 1880s, 1890s, continued up through about World War I as a way of enlarging an existing photograph. And it used solar light, and often these photographic studios would have these setups on the roof of their buildings, and they would actually use the sun to create this larger, more portrait size, this frameable image that people could hang on the wall in their parlor. And so we see these a lot. And so this is an innovation by one of the primary innovators for this was D.A. Woodward and his solar cameras. A lot of photographers around here were using that style of solar camera, including Jesse Woolley of Ballston Spa. And you could have a variety of types of photographs enlarged using the solar camera. So sometimes you'll hear people talk about them and describe them as looking almost more like a crayon portrait or a charcoal portrait or things like that, because they do have that element of they kind of look like a sketch. And sometimes these photographers would add some elements with pastels or with charcoal or things like that. Not so much with that particular one, but there are some that you see that have highlights on, say, a woman's gown bodice, that they might go in with like a white pastel and highlight the buttons or things like that. And that gives it a much more of a painting-like sort of appearance. But the basis actually is a photograph. It just comes out a little bit, not blurry isn't the right word, but again, a little bit more artistic, kind of sketch-like. But again, the basis of that is a photograph. So thank you so much for bringing that. So there's certainly a wide variety of other types of photography that comes later at the very tail end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. And you start to also get real photo postcards and different types of snapshots. You get cyanotypes that are bright blue. And I'm seeing if I have any handy right here. But so real photo postcards are pretty much exactly as they sound. And I need a couple examples here. And sometimes they're combined into one. So here's an example of a real photo postcard of a child and a doll. And here's an example of a cyanotype, which is that sort of bright blue appearance. And you flip it over and it says postcard on the back. And so some people have found this misleading because they say, oh, well, this can't be a portrait of a family member. It's a postcard, because we think postcards today, you buy it at a store. It's a souvenir thing. You send it out. And oh, it can't be my family member. It must have been a mass market thing. No, it was just about the way that you were sending it off to be developed eventually. And so they could print that right on the back. So if you did want to send off a postcard of the child to grandma, then you could. And so you find a lot of these that have that postcard backing as well. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming today, and thank you very much to the Slate Valley Museum for inviting me here. And again, my name is Ann Clothier, and I am at Brookside Museum, home of the Saratoga County Historical Society in Ballston Spa. So again, thank you very much.